GM friends, and welcome to the future of gaming. You are listening to our weekly blockchain gaming rollup, and we are recording this on the 15th of July, which I now remember is actually the wedding anniversary of my parents, so I'm going to text them today. We got Phil Collins, we got Devin Becker, and we got myself, Nico. And today we're talking about Develop, the FogDAO meetup that we did there. We're talking about pre-game NFT launches. We'll talk about some on-chain gaming releases, Steppen, Terra and Polygon, and then PlayStation rewards, which is definitely not crypto. Yeah, that's it. So let's get rolling. So if you're watching this on YouTube, I have another different background. I've been traveling a lot lately. And so this week was Develop in Brighton. It's a games conference, mostly aimed at the UK gaming scene. And I was there, and it was a reminder that like how tiny the whole crypto and Web3 space is still within games. Everyone knows what it is, but I think of all the panels there, I think out of 100 maybe there were maybe 4 or 5. And so, it's good to remember that we're like still in a big bubble, and there's definitely some interest. So Maria, who's also in FogDAO, she's also co-host of me on the Metacast, and we were on a panel about what blockchain brings to games, and there was a very famous indie developer there that is very open about his hate, or is very critical about blockchain for games. And so it was actually it was quite well attended, the panel, and I was like, oh, people are interested in this. But then I remembered maybe people were just here because they were hoping that we would get absolutely shit on by this dude who's well known. He's also he's a smart guy, but it was actually a very interesting panel. If I can, I hope it was recorded and it gets publicized, and then I can share it. But the conclusion was basically by the end that capitalism is bad and we need regulation. And yeah, because he's also against free to play and these the more modern monetization ways that can allow people to spend their whole life savings on games when they get really addicted. So I think that's one of the conclusions there. Anyway, and we also had a meetup with FogDAO, which was great. Got to see some new friends, as well friends that I already knew, and it was really fun. So I'm gonna keep doing those. And if you want to organize your own, let us know. I'm not everywhere, but
we're gonna have local
make it happen.
chapters, right?
Exactly. Future of gaming, happens everywhere. Cool. All right. So I'm very tired. If you're on YouTube, you can see this in my eyes. Devin has COVID, so he's struggling as well. Phil, how are you feeling, Phil?
I'm good. I'm coming off a 30-hour drive, so we're all thriving.
We're all absolutely struggling. That's good. There's no worries. I mean, the games industry keeps moving forward, and we're here to report on that.
Future waits for no
all right.
man.
Exactly. The future is now, old man. So let's talk about pre-game NFT. So this was a conversation I think is fascinating. We were having in the Discord. I would love to have participated, but man, it's too much to follow up on. So Devin, could you give us a short background on that conversation, and then we can talk about it.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of people that are always really into this idea of pre-selling tokens or NFTs or whatever before the game, this sort of Kickstarter mentality that we have, whether it be for fundraising or building hype or whatever. I think it's one of those things that people always think is really cool because at first it seems to work, but then in the end rarely does. And even Kickstarter has a lot of problems, right? Kickstarter's not a perfect thing either. But personally, my take was basically that in general, it's not good. It attracts the wrong audience, whether you want to say it's good financially or not. It attracts people that are there for mostly the wrong reasons. Whereas if you sell afterwards, after the game's out, it's mostly going to be the players. That being said, part of the my concession was that depending on what you're promising for those NFTs or tokens, if it's not financial rewards in any way, shape, or form, maybe not such a bad thing. If it's just early access and stuff like that, I'm even down to buy sometimes those for early access. So that kind of thing, I think I'm totally fine with.
I was sorry to interrupt you, Phil. I was talking to a founder who's building a game that is essentially like a map, and you can you start it. Everyone starts in the middle, and then you spread out across the map, and it just keeps going, keeps growing, and you're actually able to claim ownership of pieces of land on that map if you're first. And so, what they're doing is they're saying, okay, we're not giving extra benefits to the players that buy our NFTs, but they just have they can get a little bit of a head start. And so because there's actually a land grab going on, that actually means they're not giving extra financial rewards, but because there's they can get started earlier and they can do that land grab before others. It's essentially they're getting huge benefits. And benefits, especially land benefits, which means that if you own a piece of land, someone else can't. And so these are also things that people need to take into account, because that can make it very unbalanced very fast.
Yeah, I think the pre-launch token sales were a really interesting part of the fundraising process. Rather than a traditional VC round, it almost became, we're going to go out to the community, we're going to raise some money. We're going to use that as a proof of concept to go out to VC and raise a slightly larger institutional round, and that's our traction. So no, we haven't started building the game yet, but we do have traction, and now we're going to go raise our institutional round, get these venture names on our on our kind of quote unquote cap table, and then build the game once we have these 2 different rounds of funding already secured. I think it's interesting because it did enable a lot of projects to get started. And so I think in an early stage for blockchain gaming, it helped a lot of founders get off the ground and start building something, which I think we all agree is a good thing. However, totally agree with Devin on the points around bringing on the wrong audience. I think I've always viewed guilds in a similar way, where it's trying to speed run the process of getting players on board or people in your ecosystem. And the downside of that is the fact that these aren't true players that are not there for the right reasons. But yeah, I think we'll start to see that fade over time. I think we're going to start to see that fade really fast in the current market, where people are shying away from token sales in general. But in general, it just became very standardized. And while it helped teams get off the ground, it's kind of weird to give this non-dilutive equity to players that don't even know what your game will be, but they could forever be a part of your total supply in a pretty significant way, just from that early sale.
It's funny too, because there's the idea that you're doing it because you want to get the true believers on board and reward them, right? But oftentimes the people that believe the most in it are the ones that are there for the financial incentive. They believe in it enough to invest in it. And that's technically that's the right audience, right? Because they're the true believers, but it's not the right audience to play your game. And I think there is a lot of that mismatch in the space in general, right? Where when financial stuff's involved, it's very easy to end up with the wrong people involved in your game. And we always talk about there's different demographics now, because you've got the collector or the investor as different sort of I don't want to say player archetypes, because they may not be actually playing the game, but people involved in the games. And to an extent, that's not necessarily a bad thing, right? You can have people involved that are not necessarily playing the game, but it's just when they're the majority or they're impactful on the whole game itself, that's when it's problematic. And I think part of the problem too isn't just that you're promising financial returns and you attract the wrong audience. It's that they can't usually deliver on those returns either. Either whether it's just due to bad economy design, misunderstanding what didn't work with Axie, or just general lack of game development knowledge. And I think that's part of the problem too, as you said, Phil. Maybe we'll move away from that. And I think part of that is right now we just had a ton of amateurs in the space making games that maybe can't deliver. And we see this problem in Kickstarter too, where people promise the world, they do all these stretch goals, all this fundraising, and then they can't actually deliver on it. And we run into that all the time. Funny thing too, we also run into the other thing you're talking about, where people don't even necessarily need the money from Kickstarter. They just use it to prove there's an audience there. So it's very similar in a lot of ways, but the difference is when you buy something off Kickstarter, you generally don't expect it to appreciate in value. And I think that expectation is what's setting the wrong tone, right? I think if we move to the Kickstarter of hey, maybe the game won't get finished, but if it does, you'll get early access and you'll get maybe slightly cheaper, or a bonus thing on top of it, or a special edition that's not necessarily worth more, but is collectible. That kind of mentality is fine. It's just, it does suck to see, retail players get burned, but that's going to happen with Kickstarter too.
Mm-hmm. I have an idea to solve the problem. So I have an idea for game developers to be able to like kickstart without getting speculators. And so there's two things. One, they need to design it so that, and also storytell it so that whatever they sell will not have an unfair utility within their future game, or a promise for financial return in their future game, or like a ridiculous financial return in their future game. So that's one. And then two, and this is the new part. We are, in my opinion, and this is something I've been thinking about for a while now. We are using NFTs in a skeuomorphic way. And so skeuomorphism is you're using new technology to do old things. And so for me, NFTs are actually, we are using NFTs to replicate real world physical ownership. So for example, I have my phone. If I have my phone, I can do with my phone whatever I want. I can throw it away. I can give it away. I can, sell it or try and sell it for $100 million. I can give it, I can sell it for 1 cent. I can sit on it. I can break it. I can do anything I want with it. And so we're doing the same thing with NFTs. But the cool thing about NFTs is that they're actually programmable, right? We now have a way to program value on the internet. And so an idea, for example, and this is like an idea, but I think, this concept of programming NFTs should become, commonplace, is what if you said, okay, we're going to sell these early access or like our, NFTs to use within the game with no, extra utility or unfair utility, etc. We're going to sell them. So let's say 0.1 ETH. And you can only sell them for 0.1 ETH. So that's like the fixed price. You could code that into the NFT, and it won't work on OpenSea, but you can make it work on your own marketplace. That's like one solution, because that way speculators, like, there's no reason to get it because you won't be able to sell it for a higher price. What do you think of that?
I think it's been tried a little bit, and it tends to cause problems with the community, partially because of the expectations you said. But the other problem with that skeuomorphism analogy is that it's not accurate either, because you're not actually the phone example. You don't get the phone; you're getting the receipt for the phone. That's what your NFT is. Your NFT is just proof of purchase. It's not really the thing anymore, and that's why you can't do whatever you want with it, right? Because you can't modify the code for the NFT. You can't change anything about the way the NFT performs. That price example you just gave, you couldn't do that as an owner of the NFT. Whereas if I actually own something physically in real life, like the phone, I could say I refuse to take anything less than this ETH for it. And that's part of the problem.
That's my point, by the way.
What's that?
That's my point, by the way. So in normal NFTs, you can ask anything you want for it. I'm just saying, like, if we start coding or programming NFTs, then it becomes less like a phone and more like digital ownership, which, in my opinion, we just need to rethink. But
and I think we need to find a way to make it so that NFTs actually are less than just a proof of purchase, that they are more of their own thing. Maybe we need some different way of the standards and stuff, but some of it comes down to people misunderstanding how an NFT even works. It's like an NFT is technically in someone else's smart contract. Maybe they've relinquished the keys, so it seems decentralized, is no longer quote unquote under their control. But it is a contract that is just storing some data that you don't actually control, right? You can interact with it as an interface or an API if you want to consider it that, but what's coded to be able to be doable with that is coded already. And that's supposed to be the perk, right? Is like the idea of like what you're saying, where it's hard coded so no one can change that. And that's a feature, but that's also not what people expect. People expect that when they buy something digitally, they get it, right? And as we know from the long line of licensing music or licensing movies that we have nowadays, we generally don't actually own anything digital. The point of the blockchain stuff was to make it so stuff could be controlled in terms of duplication, which was a cool feature. And I'm surprised DRM isn't all over it, because it seems like a really great use for DRM. But we don't physically own the thing. And I think maybe we need to come up with some way of distributed ownership that takes that idea to the next level, so that maybe there can be code as part of the NFT instead of a code that's more of an NFT factory.
Makes sense. It seems like, there's often when you mint, especially from large companies, there's like these, agreements, terms and conditions, right? That can differ wildly. And then, all of the anti-NFT crowd has a blast going through. It's like, oh, you don't have the right to this, and so maybe there is, on one hand, there needs to be standardization on the actual smart contract code level of the NFT itself and on the standard, but maybe also on, terms and conditions wise, where it's actually pretty simple. Where we know that okay, if you own this NFT, you have the rights to this, and that. Feels like we're still far away, but feels also like we'll need something like that moving forward.
There's so much room for new standards and new features and things like that too, because like NFTs were just a standard that was like invented on the fly. And most of the internet's like that. All this stuff, the fact that we're talking right now is just stuff built on top of stuff, as people just solved problems and generally didn't ask a whole lot of permission. And blockchain is going to be, hey, we say it's permissionless, right? So let's just start building crazy new stuff like that too. Like all of it's just building on top of the smart contract stuff and just coming up with clever ways to use it.
Mm-hmm. Phil, what are your thoughts?
It's interesting because I feel like going back to the NFT sales or early token sales being part of the fundraising process, I think people are just trying to still figure out what it means to raise capital from the community. I think we're going to start seeing a lot of problems for these games that are going to take years to develop with crazy ambitions. The word or letters AAA gets thrown around a lot today, and those AAA games are usually operating on $2 to $10 million budgets, which is kind of counterintuitive to AAA. But I just don't think that current model is necessarily sustainable, and I think we're going to see a lot of adaptations to how people raise capital early on in these games. I think we're already starting to see it on the token side. If your game's going to take 4 years to build, going back to the community over and over, going back to institutional investors over and over, eventually means that probably more than 50% of your token supply is going to be firmly in the hands of investors. And you end up kind of like digging your own grave just by continuously throwing out assets or messing with the balance of your economy for the sake of funding your build.
It's like Star Citizen.
Yeah, and so I think we've already started to see an evolution in how founders are funding their projects. And I don't know exactly what that right balance is quite yet. I think there's a lot of interesting proposals that we'll see, like yours, Nico. But I think the legacy model of pre-token sales or pre-NFT sales before anything's been built is just naturally going to fade away as I think speculation takes a little bit of a backseat in blockchain gaming more broadly.
Hopefully.
Mm-hmm. Cool. All right. Let's move on to the next topic. I think this is a fascinating topic, and the conversation will be continuing to have. So next up, all right, yeah, Realms Master Scrolls. By the way, I want to shout out to, is it Konstantinos? He does like a roundup or an update on everything that's happening, and super useful. And one of the things he mentioned is Realms. So Realms is a project. It's a fully on-chain game that originally started within the Loot ecosystem. So if you remember, and you should remember, and if you don't, you should look it up. Last August, there was a drop of Loot, and Loot was like the idea of, okay, the community gets NFTs, and they're like very primitive, like very base primitives of games. It's like an item list, like an equipment list, and then the community can build shit on top of it, like games on top of it, experiences on top of it. And if you would ask the average people who actually knew that Loot was launched now, they all think that it failed and that nothing's happening. There's actually quite a bit happening. And so one of the side projects that launched a few weeks after Loot was called Realms. And so Loot is an equipment list, and so Realms is like a location. And so you could use your loot in the Realms, and the Realms is a map, and it has like resources and cities and like rivers and stuff. And each realm is unique, has its own name. And so they're building an on-chain game where it's like you build out your own empire, and you gather resources passively. And then you can either decide to use those resources to build like an army and attack people to steal their resources, or you can use your resources, build an army, and build a defensive army so people can't come and steal yours. That's a bit like the idea. It's all going to be happening on chain. They're building on StarkNet, which is still very early stage in terms of development. I think it's like still an alpha or something. And so, I know the Realms team pretty well, and they've been struggling, but I mean, my hat's off to them, man. It's hard to build a game, and they're doing it on a software, like a code basis, or like on tools that are not even done yet. And so, I think if StarkNet would have been ready. They might have been done already, but it's not ready. So they're like, and they're changing things. So it's it hasn't been easy. But so they've released their new Master Scrolls, which is like an updated white paper. And so I haven't read it because I've been on the road, but I will. And this is something really, if you're interested in like the future of gaming, which I think will be partially on chain, this is definitely worth checking out.
Sounds pretty cool. I mean, obviously the having to build out on unproven technology once it actually comes out might be interesting.
Yeah.
To say the least. But I mean, like we have like ZK Snark kind of stuff out there, right? You've got like Immutable doing its thing and whatnot. So it's not like totally unproven ideas or anything, but it does sound like they're having a rough time of it. It's almost like if they were trying to build on Ronin or something.
Yeah, and to be fair, I feel like everyone today is trying to build on what they view as the future best infrastructure as well. Not only what's best today, but who's going to continue to adapt and improve and ultimately kind of be the winner from the product side. And that's where it gets tricky, just beyond the land grab of funding that's coming from a lot of these infrastructure layers. As a team, I haven't dove too deep into StarkNet. I've heard about it from a few different teams, but I've heard a lot of bullish people on the future of it, and that almost seems like trying to predict the best product 2 years down the road versus today. And I think that foresight will be very impactful for these teams, where even though it's a pain up front, eventually you're happy with that decision as you scale.
I think
so a lot of people go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, I think one of the reasons why people are bullish is because StarkNet currently has two broad solutions. One of them is called StarkX, and StarkX is their like a private rollup technology, or their bespoke rollup technology, which is being used by Sorare, by Immutable, and by a few others. And so it already works, I guess, right? You have gas-free minting on the Immutable X, etc. And so StarkNet is going to be their public roll-up blockchain, basically, where you can build anything you want. You want to build Immutable X on StarkNet, you can do that. And so I guess why people are extra excited is, one, the founders of the Starkware, which is a company behind these solutions, are actually the inventors of this zero knowledge or some of these zero knowledge proof technologies. And two is it's already working in a very niche or very small scoped way. So I consider myself one of these people who are bullish, but it still takes time.
Yeah, I'm very bullish on the technology as well. It just to Phil's point, it reminds me of how many people. In fact, this is how Immutable was born, as well as Ronin. Jokes on that aside. All these games that built on Ethereum, and then realized it wasn't going to scale, had to then pivot to the future instead of building on the future, right? So this idea of like, I think a lot of people were burned by that, and that's why they're looking at like, okay, well, let's build on what's going to work down the road, because we don't want to have to spend like the middle of our game trying to port over to a new chain or build our new chain from scratch, which is how a lot of these layer 2s got built because of people just running into problems with the layer 1. But like all of this technology is very, very built in flight kind of thing. Everyone's kind of figuring out as we go. And I imagine at some point there will be something that's like the next great thing after ZK rollups. But right now it seems like that's where a lot of people are putting their efforts. Like Polygon is building like 5 different ZK rollup chains at the same time. Like they very much believe in it. Like just the layer 2 people in general very, very much believe in it. And Ethereum as a whole very much believes in rollups, right? So this idea of rollups and things like that, and it goes back to like, a lot of early stuff, even with Bitcoin, Lightning Network stuff, Plasma, all this stuff was these ideas of these rollups and ways of combining transactions, because I think we realize we can't just have every single transaction always be validated. So then it's like this idea of prioritizing. So we figure out, okay, here's how we can prioritize what needs to be validated. And I think at some point too, we'll figure out one level above that. Whether it be, I've seen the idea of layer 3s being like interoperability instead of some other thing. So maybe it won't be a layer 3 technology necessarily, but I think, ZK rollups are not the end of it, but I definitely think they're really cool. And I look forward to seeing more stuff on there. The only thing I worry about is the less stuff is happening on chain, maybe we start to lose some of the cool features of the blockchain, some of the composability or the transparency. And, with something like Dark Forest, it makes sense, right? Because they've got the fog of war and stuff like that. But there starts to be a situation where if game developers are picking and choosing what's on chain and what's not, they may sometimes pick the wrong things for what we believe in as the blockchain, what it's good for, right? And so maybe at some point there almost needs to be some manifesto level stuff of like, here's what should be on chain and what shouldn't for games, in order to kind of have this basic level of not necessarily rights, but just like fitting the concept of the blockchain. And then at some point, people are just going to be building games and throwing blockchain in as some side thing, and they won't care about that sort of thing. But I think the people that are more like on the purist maximalist side of things do care about that. And I think maybe we need to set that down in writing at some point as these technologies go up.
Yeah, I think one thing that I always think of in blockchain gaming is that as it becomes more mainstream and ubiquitous, I think that some of the purist ideology might start to fade. And I don't necessarily think that's a bad thing for broader adoption, but I do think, the traditional gamer is going to start to care less and less about the pure on-chain logic. And obviously there's still a lot of really cool stuff you can do with that, but it will be interesting to see how a lot of these developers try to balance being on chain with, what's the most efficient, effective solution. And if we have to cut corners around the ideology, I think most teams will over time become more and more willing to sacrifice the purist ideology.
Mm-hmm. So I had a conversation with the CEO of StarkNet, Uri, and he told me, like, the way he described it was, if I have the Mona Lisa, I'm going to want to have it on the safest layer, which in our discussions would be, ETH layer 1. But there's a ton of things I own that I don't necessarily want to have that secure, right? Because that security also comes with, it's like, having a piece of art in a vault, right? It's very safe, but it's kind of annoying if you want to show it off to your guests, I guess. So, I would say that that's probably where we're going. But that, it's an interesting point that I made in that, as a game designer, so, you have to build a good game, which already takes a lot of decisions in game design and other choices. And then you have to choose your stack. You're going to have to choose your, standard NFTs. Like I would say, like blockchain technology standard, your assets, what kind of standard will they have? And then, what we talked about earlier, the ownership standards also going to be a new thing. And then you're going to have to decide on, okay, where are they going to live? And so it's only getting more difficult. These games, man.
It's great for consultants like me, man.
That's
I'm all for it. Let's keep it complicated.
Dude, you're just like here making things more complex for everyone.
Yeah. No, trust me, you don't want to read that documentation. It's too much.
Good. All right. I feel like this very it brings us into a discussion of so. I also like that you're saying like teams are over indexing on the future. So they're like, okay, Ethereum, let's build on Ethereum. And now it's like, oh shit, yeah, Ethereum is clearly not going to scale and there's consensus around that. So what we're going to do is, what's going to what we're building is going to take, 3 years to be mainstream anyway. So what's going to be the best solution in 3 years almost? And then they're looking at ZK rollup technology. And so, one chain I've been very impressed by is Polygon. And I feel like, the consensus about that has been going or has been getting really positive. I know the head of Polygon Studios, Ryan Wyatt, and he's my guy is a killer, man. It's crazy. Like since he joined, the amount of deals that they're doing is like it's Meta and then all other types of huge companies. And I like that they're also thinking about the future. So it feels like a safe place to go to for the moment. What do you guys think?
I like the vibe of it, man. I don't know. There's just something about it just feels like a natural layer two to me. And it's like, I mean, we have seen it have some issues, right? When Sunflower Farms, like went pretty ham on it, and it wasn't quite CryptoKitties level, right? But it was still pretty bad, like congestion wise. And I do worry a little bit about a lot of these people building on that. I do hope that maybe there just needs to be like guidelines for, you can't dictate necessarily who builds on your network, right? Like it's supposed to be permissionless, but there needs to be like, hey, here's some guidelines on how you best practices for not blowing this network up and having to reboot your game after a month. Those kind of situations would be great to avoid. And I mean, like, let's say Facebook or Meta, I still can't get used to calling them anything but Facebook, but let's say they go crazy on Polygon. Like, is that going to scale? Because Polygon isn't to the ZK rollups and all that stuff yet. They're still very much like a simpler layer 2 than what they want to build. And they have all these other different types of chains they're trying to do. Some more like private style ones, some meant for enterprise, some just meant for better like ZK scaling. But I wonder when those are starting to roll out and if that's going to keep pace, or if we're going to end up with an Ethereum situation on a layer 2, and then all those people building on Polygon are going to be like, I'm going to go build my own chain now. And that kind of situation ends up repeating. Like, I love to see it all happen within one ecosystem, mostly just because of the on-ramp situation with layer 2s. I hate having to go between layer 1 and layer 2, and then between layer 2s, and then I'm having to use on-ramps just so I can just buy directly on the layer 2. Those kind of situations do kind of suck. Bridges are cool and all, but they're also like hack fests, unfortunately, at the moment. So I would love for us to have a solution, say this is the solution, but maybe Polygon's just another bridge.
Yeah. No, I mean, to Nico's point, I think Polygon has demonstrated that they're just absolute killers on the partnership front. A partnership and just going out and winning this land grab that we talk about. And I feel like sometimes land grab almost sounds like a derogatory term. Like you're just kind of going out and buying your customers. But in this world where most of these infrastructure solutions are still figuring themselves out and continuing to adapt and improve, yes, they are competing on product quality. But I mean, there's a lot more to that. And I think that the ability to go out and do what Polygon's done from a funding perspective, from a partnership perspective, is almost a self-reinforcing flywheel of enhancing their ability to develop a superior product really quickly. And so I think that is something that is really interesting to me about them is, yes, they've gotten their lead at least partially from their ability to go out and land grab. But on top of that, I think that does feed back to product quality and can eventually set them ahead and help them figure out their scaling solutions as well.
It can, but killers. I mean, sometimes
killers.
Monopolies don't lead to like improvements in that. You look at Facebook, you look at Twitter.
Yeah.
I don't think they've taken their monopoly and money and used it to make the product better. Unfortunately, like it depends on who's running it, right? Like obviously these things matter, and it's interesting with the layer 2s because you generally do have someone running the network, whereas like layer 1s, like Ethereum and Bitcoin, are not run by anyone per se. Like I know everyone thinks like Vitalik runs Ethereum for some reason, but there's situations where you have, and I think it's been said before by some people that it's always interesting that layer 2s have a marketing team and layer 1s don't, right? And so you have a very different set of kind of incentives and ability to land grab that you don't have with layer 1. So layer 1s have to compete entirely on product and on like ecosystem, whereas layer 2s can compete on taking their big funding that they have and spending it on marketing, spending it on studio acquisition, spending it on like just, I mean, essentially bribery, like for getting games on there. I'm not saying that necessarily in a negative way, but it kind of is partnership bribery, which works, right? Like that at the end of the day, if they're not acquiring these companies, I guess that's fine.
And two, one thing that's interesting is considering the funding environment too, where maybe back when venture capital funding was a lot more available for a larger pool of founders, the incremental funding from something like a Polygon, you get $500,000 from them. It's maybe not moving the needle as much. I do wonder if in the current market, especially with the cash reserves that somebody like a Polygon has, if that the strategy of we're going to go fund and get partnerships actually becomes even more impactful over the next 12, 24 months. As previously you could maybe compete on product quality because people were getting funding from other sources. As that funding dries up, I do wonder if funding will just continue to play an even more important role in how people are choosing their platforms. Even though it was already really important, the dynamic with cash for these founders is changing really fast.
I do see some of the bigger companies like Animoca brands trying to diversify a little bit too. Like they seem to go in a lot on Polygon, yet now their MotoGP ignition is going to be on Flow, for example. So like there definitely is a little bit of hedging bets as well, I think, coming from some of the bigger companies that have a lot of projects. And that may have also been a partnership thing too. Like we don't know what went on behind the scenes. Maybe like Dapper Labs was just like, hey, we'll help make this really cool in this way or that way. And that convinced them, and not just, it wasn't hedging bets or financial or anything like that. Because Animoca doesn't need the financial incentives to go over to any of those, right? Like I'm sure they wouldn't mind, but they definitely don't need it. So like there's definitely still like some level of like, let's just try these other things. Like Avalanche definitely brought a lot of people over with subnets combined with bribery. And and I'm sure Immutable has a big fund now as well. Immutable will probably be like, hey, you know, we'll help you come over here, like, because its big games haven't really come out, so it's still pretty much just Gods Unchained. But they have a lot, like they're trying to get like Illuvium and stuff like that, and Guild Guardians and stuff. So that, you know, there's a lot around here, and like some of these networks are further along than others. Like Flow is an interesting example because they are still kind of mid project building, but they have a really cool project, and they just don't really have anything that like proves it out yet outside of sports collectibles, which, to be fair, they're doing absolutely stellar on. So,
Good. Interesting discussion, and curious to see how this plays out. And I'm actually pretty sure that at some point we'll see like centralization problems with some of these blockchains, or like, you know, some of them being too powerful. And I don't know. It's yeah, there's a lot of problems we still have to face, it feels like, but we'll solve it when we get there, you know.
It's your guys' job to invest in the one that you think is going to be that, right? The next Facebook.
Exactly. So, you know, I was going to say talking about the next phase, but it's completely unrelated. We have Steppen, who has made a lot of money, and they're showing it off. Who wants to introduce that? Devin, was that you?
Yeah. Yeah, they're kind of touting their profits. I don't think they necessarily were like trying to brag, but for a game that's like just been pretending it's not cratering for a while, it was pretty funny to see them blog about. I mean, every one of their blog posts is like almost self-satire because of how, I don't know, like willfully in denial they are of many things, to the point where it's mind-bending sometimes to read their blogs. But this one was interesting that they were just kind of like talking about all these things that they were going to do with their profits, and how like they were trying to instill confidence in the community by saying like they were doing all these things that was going to help, but they were also talking about how they were going to be making profit in the future, as if like that was going to reassure people like, oh, okay, well, if they're going to find ways to make profit in the future, then I'm fine as a Steppen owner, except for it's still the same basic fact at the end of the day that the rewards that you get do not come from Steppen. And I think that bears repeating because people seem to really forget that. So, you know, I'm going to repeat the line. Steppen does not pay you for walking, running, whatever. They don't. Other players do. That's it. Like, other players are sponsoring you for exercising. And I think that flies over everyone's head. And so Steppen bragging about profits and talking about, like, the one way they're talking about, we're going to contribute back. We're going to do a buyback and burn of GMT. How's that going to help my earnings if my earnings are in GST? And that continues to try and burrow down till it reaches China at this point. Like, it's not helping.
But well, my answer would be, I think we describe this as, you know, there's value coming in, value being coming in, and value going out. And so in your case, you're saying, okay, if I exercise, I'm actually, like, if I sell my tokens, I'm extracting value from the ecosystem. And what they're saying is, okay, we're going to put value back into the ecosystem. But the way you're saying that they're going to do that is not the correct way, or it only indirectly supports the earnings, or not at all?
It just reminds me of Sky Mavis, the way they kind of like realized SLP was kind of donezo and just started pivoting everything to talking about AXS as that continues to fall. It's like you're just describing what's still mid-fall, like as if that's the next thing. Like, and then what's going to be after that, a third token. Like, that's what it feels like. It's not really resolving any of the underlying issues, and it's just kind of distracting. Like, they just did that recently with this. I don't know if you guys saw this, but it's the craziest thing. The third realm is ape, everybody, except for, if you read closely, it has nothing to do with Basie or Yuga Labs or anything. They're just putting the word ape in there and just associating themselves forcefully with another project. I mean, yeah, maybe the blockchain's permissionless, but it doesn't mean your marketing can be. It's just, I'm sorry, like, I'm sure there's some good people at that company, but the level of disingenuousness that comes out of them just blows my mind. Like, that people defend them as a company because they clearly either, like, they're just high on their own smoke or what, but it's out of control at this point because people still defend them. Like, I still get in arguments with people, like, trying to say, like, oh, but no, they're going to do this, and this is going to fix it, and then this is going to fix it. And it's like, maybe too many people are getting used to listening to the U.S. Federal Reserve. I don't know what it is.
Yeah. It's, I mean, I've always said, I think whole move to earn is the concept is interesting and could potentially actually be sustainable. But I guess the way you have to set up well, and maybe they've already shot themselves. They already shot themselves in the foot. I don't know. Yeah, I've been too much up to date, but it's difficult. Hard to look into their minds and see what their real plans are. But I do feel like if they approach it very, very, very well, it feels like it's solvable.
I would love to see that.
And that's something that I think is interesting about the whole play to earn movement more broadly. And I think one of the fundamental shortcomings we've seen as the model has continued to be iterated is, I think at the end of the day, it comes down to, like, do players need to be financially rewarded, or do people need to be financially rewarded for what they're doing? And when a lot of these systems, to Devin's point, are all about players paying each other almost, like continuing to feed the flywheel. Like if you're doing something that isn't adding value, or if you're doing something that doesn't necessarily warrant payment or financial reward, I think that cycle is inevitably going to break, right? Because then it becomes more about the hype. It becomes more about the upside and the what ifs of earning while doing this, whatever, playing a game, moving, whatever it is. I think that's what play to earn's having to deal with now is, is the value that's being provided worth financial reward? And in pretty much every case, I feel like the answer has been probably not at this point, and that's why the cycle eventually breaks, because it's more about propping up the ecosystem versus genuinely rewarding people for their contributions, and that's not sustainable.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, like, there's not a lot of games that have some opportunity for someone to contribute something of real value. Even esports isn't really like what most people think it is. It's just a marketing vehicle, like with people getting paid to perform as part of that, which is not necessarily a bad thing, but it's also not exactly what people think it is. People aren't being necessarily paid for their skill per se, just like in regular sports, they're being paid for their performance and their public performance and what that does for marketing. In this case, it's for a particular game. As opposed to when it's traditional sports, it's for a particular team, and so you buy their jerseys and all that other stuff, right? Like, there's just marketing vehicles, or like the conversation, Nico, you were having with the other Bitcraft guys about it being part of user acquisition, right? Like, sort of bribing or acquiring users early on, kind of what you were saying, Phil, where it's just trying to get these people incentivized. And there's so few games where, like, it actually makes sense, and like, the funny part is we do sort of have one economic model or game platform where that does sort of happen in Roblox, right? Where kids are getting actually paid in a way for things they actually do contribute a value. And there's a whole economy around that. And that works for the most part. I mean, we could discuss whether that's exploitively done as I did with you previously, Nico, on another, the Metacast one, but it proves at least there's something there, right? And we had this also before with Second Life, right? Where Second Life had its whole economy and like people building businesses on there and stuff like that. So there is ways to do stuff like that, but in order to really do that, you end up just running a business. Kids on Roblox end up like growing to a point where they're running it like a business, like a game studio or whatever. People in Second Life ended up running it like a small business. So these things where play and earn maybe aren't ever truly compatible in the same sense of like what you're actually doing for money, unless it's just rote behavior that needs to be done Mechanical Turk style. And I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing, but it's something we do need to consider is like, is there any real examples of play and earn anywhere in the world that we can use as a model? If so, then we need to look at how those work economically and if we can borrow something from that context.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think at the end of the day, it all comes down to what value is being provided, and is that value worth financial reward? And like there are iterations like you were talking about where like user-generated content and creating games and being rewarded based on the playtime and based on the revenue that your creations are generating, like that's adding value. Like there are things within games and within these ecosystems that teams are creating right now that is genuine value, but like is simply engaging with a game through playing worth it. I think that model's continuously breaking right now. So I think it'll be interesting to see what value does warrant it. And I think there's clear answers right now, like a user-generated content, for example. And then I think there's creative things that we haven't even thought of yet that we'll continue to to add value from the player perspective.
Well, it makes me think of like power leveling or speed running people in MMOs or Diablo or stuff like that. That's kind of an interesting one where it's like still sort of play, but it's play as a service. And maybe there's some other models within that as well. The only problem with that kind of model is you're kind of subverting the game design, because you're by speed running people, you're also kind of depriving them of the fun of that leveling, which is its own weird sort of discussion. But I think there maybe is other stuff out there we just haven't thought of, as you're saying, yet. And I think that's what we should be exploring instead of just trying to find the next Ponzi.
Mm-hmm.
Good. I feel like this is actually a discussion I'd love to jump into, but it feels like it warrants almost its own episode. Or how value is created within games or the metaverse. So that's for another time. I think I don't know how long we've been going because I've been dropping out the whole time because my RAM's gone. I don't know what's happening. Anyway,
we're getting there. About another 15 minutes.
Yeah, no, I think, well, at least for me, this was a fantastic episode. Thanks, guys. Interesting. Devin, should we do a new game? Did we announce this on the podcast already, or did you just put it in the Discord?
I didn't put it in the Discord. Last time we did one, but I was just going to suggest people go out and try out Blanco's Block Party, especially since that's going to be coming to the Epic Store. I assume it hasn't yet, but I haven't double checked. But I do think it's an interesting game that's meant to be like its own kind of thing as well. And it's on EOS, I believe, or an EOS fork or something like that, which is a blockchain we don't see a lot of games on these days that are popular. I think it's cool and it's free to play. You also were able to get like some free stuff off Amazon Prime. The Prime Gaming stuff or whatever. So it's cool. It's free. Might as well try it out. This one you don't have to tweet them or whatever, I guess. There were some problems. I apologize for people being a little freaked out by Nine Chronicles' sort of system.
That's true. Yeah, so what happened, Devin was like, oh, you should try this Nine Chronicles game. Yeah. And they asked access to your Twitter account and they could like delete tweets and stuff.
You can always just deny that after. It literally is just to get you to the download for the EXE. Personally, I think that's a little shady that they did that. But at the end of the day, I don't think they're actually doing anything with that. So I apologize if that caught people off guard.
Good. All right. Cool. Well, Devin, Phil, thank you so much for this. This was great. Good discussions. Great insights. And so, listener, hope you enjoyed it too. If you did, share with your friends and let us know if you liked it and what we could do better as well. And then if you want to join the conversation, feel free to go to thefutureofgaming.wtf, join us, come hang out, and come explore where this whole space is moving towards. And with that, proud, and we look forward to speaking to you next week. Ciao.